The gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, while I take the gentleman at his word, still has significant unintended consequences and problems. I appreciate the gentleman's efforts to more narrowly define sexually explicit content as content that involves any criminal sexual assault defined and punishable as a felony under Article 7 of Chapter 4 of Title 18.2. Here's the thing. We still have a slippery slope problem. According to the American Library Association and its Office of Intellectual Freedom and the Freedom to Read Foundation, as opposed to being a local decision, this bill would make Virginia the first state to have a statewide policy requiring teachers to identify classroom materials with some sexually explicit content label and notify parents who would have the right to opt out their children and request that the teacher give them something less objectionable to study of equivalent value. So what are we doing? What we're doing is we're requiring teachers to redefine whatever they're teaching solely in terms of how much sexually explicit content it may contain. More than likely, and here's the rub, more than likely a teacher will not be able to do 2 entire lesson plans for the same class, sometimes on a very quick turnaround after an objection from just one parent. This makes it much less likely that they'd be willing to even attempt to use anything that might be considered objectionable in their lessons. Without intending to do it, this will have a dampening effect to avoid any content that might be found objectionable. Here's the thing. When the government establishes laws to label literature in terms of a single factor, regardless of that factor's significance to the larger world of literacy, or of literary merit or meaning, it edges closer to censorship. It means we are labeling content for the sole purpose of suppressing it. Parents do, of course, need and should have the right and even obligation to supervise their children's education, but this bill is about everybody's kids. Also, this bill is broadly written to include all education materials, not just literature or English assignments. What about art history? Would a trip to the National Gallery of Art require a warning to parents that many Greek and Roman sculptures and paintings by George Romney, Edgar Degas, Domenico Beccofini, and Francisco Goya depict sexual assault? Are we saying that history and civics classes would not be allowed to discuss the real problem of war crimes involving rape? Would we not be allowed to teach the Old Testament in religion or literature class with its many references to sexual assault and rape? And what about Shakespeare? So we can't teach Titus Andronicus, Measure for Measure, Pericles, Cymbeline, the rape of Lucrece, The Tempest, and A Midsummer Night's Dream? For a junior taking AP English and learning iambic pentameter, what is less objectionable literary work that is the equivalent to any of Shakespeare's plays? Most importantly, what is an equivalent work to Toni Morrison's Beloved, which teaches us in a very raw and unflinching manner and terms about the horrors of slavery? Does it not matter that the folks who originally pushed this bill are raising objections to Pulitzer Prize-winning novels or the works of Nobel laureates? English classes, particularly in the last 2 years of high school, often deal with adult topics. Does the state government need to be involved in a discussion that could and should be more simply resolved by parents talking to their kids? Is it really better to have a state law forcing that conversation? Let's be clear. The requirement that educators identify, label, and stigmatize literature according to a single standard is a form of censorship that is meant to suppress the teaching of certain texts without their regard to their literary merit. Moreover, taking pieces of literature out of context from an overall narrative is ludicrous. It does a disservice to literature, academia, and I think this body. Considering our role in the world economy, when we ban books in schools, even temporarily, as recently happened in Accomack County, we get a black eye all around the world, as was the case with newspapers in Europe who had a field day. At the end of the day, this is a slippery slope to backdoor censorship. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, the home of the Sage of Monticello and the home of Thomas Jefferson and the home of James Madison, I hope that we will vote against this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.